Master!
Here is what they don't tell you. Icarus laughed as he fell, threw his head back and yelled into the winds, arms spread wide, teeth bared to the world. There is a bitter triumph in crashing when you should be soaring. The wax scorched his skin, ran blazing trails down his back, his thighs, his ankles, his feet. Feathers floated like prayers past his fingers, close enough to snatch back. Death breathed burning kisses against his shoulders where the wings joined the harness. The sun painted everything in shades of gold. There is a certain beauty in setting the world on fire and watching from the center of the flames.
Oh, this is the squeakiest part of the floor, isn't it? You're gonna have to cope with that. Welcome, everyone, to our Histor-Tea, episode 3. We're finally rhyming. Thank God. Sorry I was away. I tried recording this video, and I used a whisk as a microphone, and you could hear it clicking the entire time, so I had to scrap the entire 2.5 hours of footage, and then my life fell apart, and then I got sick, and then the world fell apart, and then I got sick again. And here we are. Still sick, but I need to get this story out of my system so bad. I have so much information about this one little chunk of history that if I don't share it, I think I'm going to have some kind of mental break. So today, we're going to be talking about the art forgeries of Han van Meegeren. And with that name, let's start with our disclaimers. 1, I am delirious. Okay. I'm home alone, so I'm unsupervised. I am American, unfortunately, therefore I will be getting pronunciations incorrect. You're just gonna have to make your peace with that now. I actually read this book, twice. So my brain is mostly melted. Why did I read it twice? You might be asking. I had started reading it with the purpose of making this video. Shout out to my dad for giving me the idea. Thanks, homeboy. And then I got really interested in the book, and so I just read it like as a book first, not using my brain apparently. And then I realized that in order to make this video, I was gonna have to read it again because I didn't take any notes on it. There's so much information in this book that there was no way I was just gonna be able to read this one time and then summarize it. It's the kind of book where like every sentence is a new fact. It's incredible. It's very good. I would highly recommend it just for the purposes of my dicking about. Not exactly ideal. So anyway, I read it a second time, took extensive notes on it, and then I proceeded to watch a couple documentaries and a couple movies about it whilst I was ill for the first time. And here we are. Another thing, history, especially this point in history during the whole World War and all that kind of stuff, is contested ground. There is not really a single, completely, entirely unrefuted fact in probably this entire story. That's just due to the nature of our main character and the nature of the complete and utter destruction of the European world at this time. I also don't think there's a single morally perfect person in this story, myself included. I'm simply retelling a story that I've heard from a decent amount of sources. It's for entertainment purposes. Don't let your professors knife me. Also, have you guys heard of this guy named Icarus? That's right, we finally made it to Greek mythology. I'm kind of surprised it took us this long. I wasn't a Percy Jackson kid, but I certainly had potential. In Greek mythology, there was this guy, an inventor by the name of Daedalus, who basically fucked around and found out his way through Athens and then through Crete. His previous story doesn't really matter for the purposes of our conversation here, but during this time, he took a boy named Icarus under his wing. Unrelated, let's talk about Vermeer, shall we? Johannes Vermeer was an artist. You might know him from this painting. Yeah. He was born in 1632, died in 1675, so he was only 43 years old, which like 1600s, so kind of grandpa age, but still, you know, a bit young. He lived in the Netherlands in Delft. This guy fucked. He had 14 children, which is nutso, but also, again, 1600s kind of reasonable. At current standing, at the time of this video, there are 37 known Vermeer paintings. There are some that are contested. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a forever thing with this fella. As far as his art education, we don't really know anything about him. We don't know if he went anywhere, if he studied, or if it was just kind of a hobby. I mean, this guy was a freak when it came to making like really good paintings, so it's hard to believe it was a hobby, but We don't know. So as far as the art itself, he's a very enigmatic painter. I think I pronounced that right. He has a certain spark to his works. Like, you look at it and you're like, that's Vermeer. That's really frustrating because it's the kind of thing where it's like, well, you just know. But as we'll get into it, no, bitch, you don't just know. But from an actual, like, analysis standpoint, he uses a lot of colors in his shadows. It's not just black. Was it Michelangelo that said don't use black ever? You'd think I would know. I don't remember. There's some artist who's like, don't ever use black because it makes your image flat. Vermeer did use black, but also used a lot of different colors. He also, fascinatingly, this was in one of the documentaries I watched, he uses green as shadows. Like, for example, in one of the paintings, it's shown that, like, for the shading, like, underneath the jawline, he used green, which is crazy because no one's skin is green. Even people who now try to recreate Vermeer paintings or like emulate his style can't really figure out how he made that look normal. He has, in general, a very captivating use of color. For example, this is my favorite Vermeer painting, this red shutter. It's so striking. It is just like, oh my god. It's really, to me personally, kind of shows that he had this eye for everyday beauty. Something very important to note is his settings are typically in a house, sometimes outside on a street, very rarely. But when it comes to his more subject person paintings, they're like sitting at the dining room table, sitting at the drawing room table. So what's featured in these paintings, very important. If there's a book on the table, what is the book about? If there's a globe on the table, that person is probably a traveler. With the objects in these paintings, because it's so important to the story or the character or the meaning of this painting, if things are added to paintings, which they have been, it changes the meaning entirely, which is really frustrating. They were talking about in one of the documentaries that someone added a bird cage to this painting, look, hey, I'm not down for fucking with these kind of art pieces in any way, and I'm also not down for forgery, just gonna put that out there. But like, if you're gonna do it, fucking full send it. Why are you just adding a birdcage? I don't understand why someone would do that. But it changed the meaning of the painting entirely, and changed, therefore, the meaning of Vermeer's artwork as a whole. He only has a very small amount of paintings. Therefore, every single painting is really, really important to understand who this man was. So his early paintings were kind of all over the place, which also makes him kind of doubly interesting. That's not that uncommon. I mean, everyone needs to find their style eventually, and he seems to like settle into it. But there are significant gaps in his career as well. So it's like, what were you up to? Was this a hobby? And if this was a hobby, how the fuck are you making it look so good? I'm pissed. They also get more complex as time goes on, but they also tend to get smaller. He made really tiny paintings. So it's kind of a question of, why did he make this? Clearly he wasn't doing enough to make a career out of it. Maybe. So let's kind of go into the impact of this fella over here. So there are no known self-portraits of Vermeer. The only one we have is one of his back. But someone did forge a self-portrait of Vermeer, and I forged a gun out of metal that I chewed from a mountain because I'm so fucking mad about this. Oh my god, if you're gonna forge a fucking painting, do not forge a self-portrait, because it just like ruins everything about that, about what we know about the artist. I need to take a deep fucking breath. I actually got so mad when I found this out, because it is just useless and selfish and whatever. Something also interesting of note is the fact that Vermeer means something different to every generation. This is a point that was made in, again, one of the documentaries that I watched, because currently he's known as like the painter of women, especially because he was painting during the 1600s. We don't really see a lot of men that are like women, right? They're usually like women, you know? So it was fascinating to see these women with this certain amount of depth to them. Obviously, he wasn't the only artist to do this. There was a lot of focus on psychology, and then, like I said, with the objects and the paintings, a lot about them in these works that we just don't know that much about because we don't know who this guy is. So he's this, like, mysterious, probably hot and sexy guy that we just don't know anything about. The first time that his works were counted basically was in 1866. Over 70 works were attributed to Vermeer by some fucking French guy. He marked like 49 of them saying like, these are authentic for sure. So now we've met our proverbial, hypothetical, situational Daedalus, right? And we're missing some other guy. The name is kind of escaping me. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is where these fellows are discussed, the story is like half a paragraph. There's not really much time for characterization. It's just kind of like, ooh, he's a little bit playful. And when Daedalus is making the wings, he's like fucking around with them to the point that it interrupts Daedalus's work, okay? Like, he's messing around with the things that are eventually gonna kill him to the point where it fucks up the work that Daedalus is making. Are you seeing the parallels? Am I making it obvious enough? Han van Mechelen. Let's get one thing straight. In every single thing that I watched, they pronounce his last name differently. Okay? Not my fault. I'm choosing the one that makes me sound coolest. Migren. Mechelen. Mayherin. His birthday, October 10th, 1889, so mark that down. He died in 1947, spoiler alert. He was 58 years old. He grew up in Deventer, which is in the Netherlands. He studied architecture at Delft Technical University starting in 1907. He had a genuine portraitist career until the 1920s. He was, and I quote, outgoing, outspoken, and ostentatiously playful about leading a secret life. He got along with the rich folk. He would do their portraits for them quite a bit and also was able to make a lot of forgery trade connections because rich people are bored and do crazy shit. I've watched enough Succession to know that for sure. He went through a lot of personality changes and character shifts throughout his life, depending on who he was spending his time with, who he could get his money from particularly, and basically how it benefited him the most. It's important to note that it likely wasn't a personality disorder kind of thing. He was just more of a manipulative fuck. And I realize that has nuance to it, but like, he was a Nazi, so I'm not really giving this guy a lot of sympathy, okay? Let's just get that out of the way. This guy sucked bad. No matter how charming and lovely and kind of fucking funny he sounds and is depicted as, this guy was not technically, but he was a Nazi and he was bad. Let's say it with me, kids. Nazis are bad. One more time. Nazis are bad. Okay, moving on. That's honestly what makes the story so intriguing to me. I was intrigued by it in the first place because I'd never really gotten into art forgery that much. But then you start reading about all of these people, especially in the book. None of them are good. Not a single one is a completely guilt-free person. Even the people who are like the good guys do some fuck shit. Anyway, let's begin. 1908 is when our story kind of begins. We're coming straight out the gate with the best name in this entire story. It is all downhill from here. Let me introduce to you Leonardus Nardus. Is that not the greatest thing you've ever heard in your life? Look at this man. Look at this man. He was, to quote, fluent in 4 languages, a champion swordsman, and an internationally known chess master. Nardus was a highly charismatic individual, and he used his charm to a devastating effect in business dealings. This man had game, and honestly, he could get it. Look, I don't know a lot about him, but I would like to. If you would like me to try to make a video on Leonardus Nardus, it will take half of a comment. I just want to say the word Nardus over and over and over again, and he seems wildly interesting. But for the purposes of our story, he sold fakes on fakes on fakes. Mostly sold to Americans because, shocker, right? And in 1908, he was caught by Hofstede de Groot, who's an art attributor, but he was never actually exposed or anything. 1, he was ridiculously rich, therefore above the law. And 2, was already back in Europe. The fellows catching on to him were in America. And then, you know, everything got really bad really quick, so he was just fine for, I'm pretty sure, the rest of his life. Nardus's tactics paved the way for art forgery. The way he would go about selling them, what he would say as a cover-up story, were quite trendy, if you will. And when he got caught, there was the need then for a middleman, an authenticator, an attributor, someone with qualifications to back this guy up, which was then difficult because art forgers had to then not only convince the person with the check, but a different person who is skilled in looking at paintings and saying, that's fake. Coming back to our main character here, in 1911, Han gets his girlfriend at the time, Anna de Voot, pregnant. Awesome. Sick as fuck, dude. He actually eventually has 2 kids with her. This one, the first one, was born in 1912. His name is Jacques, and then Pauline in 1915. This same year, a real Vermeer, the woman with a balance, was rediscovered. After studying architecture due to, like, the pressure of his father, basically, because, shocker, this guy has daddy issues. He quits it and goes to study art instead. And this guy fucks. He's really good at it, actually. He ends up winning a university-wide drawing competition. The focus of this art institution was on 17th century painters, aka cough cough, Vermeer. So they made him emulate the styles of old artists. His creation of his new works could be likened to... Moving on, 1916, one of Hans' friends, Karel de Boer, is hyping our boy up. He's like, oh my god, this guy is a painter designed to walk the path of acclaim. Okay. Also, just another thing. Han was fucking his wife. Cheating on his girlfriend, fucking his best friend's wife. So we're starting off strong. 1917, Han and his still put together family moves to The Hague, which is in Holland, Netherlands, and was very arts-centric at the time, and I believe now as well. Most of the purpose was because they were neutral in the war, so pretty chill place to go if you don't want to deal with anything. He has his first solo show there. Oh my god, how fun. And he has his own style. This is also significant. His teachings were to emulate the style of old artists, but it's clear that he's developing his own sense of self and way of painting and way of seeing and presenting the world. These pictures are good. If I can find some, I'll put them up here. I was kind of struggling trying to find them. There's a lot in the book. I would really recommend just looking through the pictures of the book because there's a lot that I saw that I couldn't find online. Arguably, some of these are impressionistic, modernistic, have some features of that. He never identified with those groups or anything. We're gonna put a pin in that. Starting in 1920 and then all the way through 1932, Han worked for and with a man named Theo van Wijngaarden, yeah, who was an artist, a picture restorer, and had a reputation for finding the signatures of great masters on old paintings that were previously unsigned. If you know what I mean. Forging. He would just, I think actually just maybe sign paintings because he couldn't really paint that well. I think he might have made some of his own work, but he could not do what Han would eventually do and what a lot of the forgers would do. I think he would just kind of put a cheeky little signature on these paintings. So then Han comes in and is like, hey, I can paint well. Do you want to work together? Yeah. And Theo actually was the assistant to Leonardus. They were partners, so his tactics carried on over to what these freaking goobers are gonna do. 1921 is when allegedly the first forgery was made. There doesn't seem to be any documentation of this. It's more based on rumor. This was a fake Franz Hals, this is Franz Hals. Basically, what they were trying to do during this time was find a replacement for oil paint, because the biggest obstacle in selling these paintings was oil paint takes forever to dry, and to make oil paint look like oil paint from the 1600s is very difficult because you're just going to have to wait that many years for the oil paint to dry. They're experimenting with different mediums to make it look like oil paint and pass as oil paint, along with using 1600s pigments like ultramarine blue, I think is what it is. Something very specific that Vermeer would use and can be chemically tested. Therefore, you sell this painting, someone's like, I don't know about this. You chemically test it, and then it doesn't show up with that specific kind of blue. You're fucked, mate. 1922 is the first known forgery. It's called The Boy Smoking. If I can find it, I'll put it up here. I actually felt like I was going crazy trying to find this painting. I don't know if it's in the book. By the time I realized I didn't have a picture of it, I had returned the book to the library. I cannot find it anywhere on the internet. It's really hard to find pictures of forgeries on the internet because people don't really want to show it off on the same caliber as the original works. Pretty sure it's a forged Vermeer. Pretty sure. It might be a Franz Hals. I don't know. Feel free to correct me if you somehow know this information. I'd really appreciate it. And it was likely a collaboration between Han and Theo. Like I said, Theo couldn't paint like the masters, but he still had some skill in it. I mean, if you can forge a signature, you can probably forge, you can fuck around a little bit. And with the paint medium experimentation, they were collabing. It is very significant to note that what made Han such a good forger is he not only emulated the style of Vermeer. This is debatable, honestly, because what he did was he emulated what you would expect from the gaps in Vermeer's career. Because if you go through Vermeer's paintings, there's one era where it has a certain aesthetic and technique to it, then a significant gap. And then another era, certain aesthetic technique, rinse and repeat 3 or 4 times. So Han not only took Vermeer's style and brushwork, but filled in these empty gaps. He also tended to kind of piece together works. Like, he would take certain objects and just recreate those and put them on different paintings, or he would take certain postures of people or certain stances and recreate those in different paintings just with different configurations so people would never really catch on to it. So yeah, this guy was wickedly talented. He not only did this for Vermeer, but two other artists, Franz Hals and De Haach. I'm forgetting his last name, but this is De Haach. He emulated 3 separate master artists' style. That's insane. That we all agree on that's crazy. During this year, another discovery was found, I believe, via the boy smoking. Old oil paint cannot be dissolved by alcohol, but new oil paint can. So you take a rag and you rub it, and if the paint comes off, you're going to jail. But the solution that Theo found was gelatin glue somehow. I don't know. This is kind of sciencey. I don't really understand what's going on. But gelatin glue does not come off if you wipe it with alcohol. Alright, we're not done with 1922. A lot happened this year. Han has his second show at the same gallery, the Basing Gallery, and this time it does not go well. Maybe it's because the guy whose wife he was fucking was not really happy with him at this point. That's up for debate. I'm just speculating here. But generally it was believed that his paintings were a bit too old school. They were emulating Christian ideology, but Han was very clearly not a practicing Christian. I mean, as much as you can be during this time, like everyone kind of like went to church. But like he was cheating on his wife. So not the most high and mighty, morally profound person. And everyone could kind of tell that he was just doing these biblical scenes for the sake of doing biblical scenes. There didn't really appear to be any connection with the scriptures or anything like that. It was just kind of like this is what I know, this is what I'm painting. And that's not hindsight bias. That actually, people actually said that. Despite this mild critique, the paintings were mostly bought. He later will kind of claim that this was his villain origin story, but people were like, yeah, it's kind of weird, kind of mid, but I'll still buy it. So it really was not as intense as he later claimed it was. The way that forgeries go, the popular ones, the successful ones, obviously tend to emulate the style of the artist they're attempting to fake, but also take on the tastes and attitudes and themes of their current period. Han skillfully did this. His forgeries tended to reflect compositions that were popular at the time and could, in a subconscious way, connect to the current themes at the time. This skill, whether subconscious or not, allows our Icarus to take... But not before his wife divorces him. Hey, she was cheating on him too, okay? They just didn't really like each other. She takes the kids and fucks off. And honestly, good for her. This is in 1923, and during the same year, some person is getting their portrait done by Han, and they were just chit-chatting, whatever. And at some point, this motherfucker just blurts out, hey, I forged that Vermeer, the boy smoking, I did that. And they were like, pardon moi? What are you fucking talking about? That's, what? Huh? And Han was like, yeah, I actually forged a lot. So, and the person getting their portrait done was like, that feels illegal. I should probably tell the cops. So they write a letter to the police, and they're like, hey, you might want to check this out, because this is a fucking problem, probably. And Han shuts the fuck up after that. He apparently was quite outspoken, a little bit, he would be kind of silly about it. He'd be like, yeah, I forged Vermeers. And everyone's like, Han, you're so funny. And he's like, also Franz Hals. Also De Haach, if you're feeling crazy. And everyone's like, Han, you rapscallion. But he was fully telling the truth. Anyway, he stopped doing that after this situation. And that lack of luck continues into what we call the Laughing Cavalier scandal. Here, I think, is a picture of the Laughing Cavalier. Okay, hey team, editing Sydney popping in here. I don't know what I'm talking about in this clip. I do not know. I swear on my life that the painting in my notes and in the book and in everything I did my research on was called The Laughing Cavalier, and it was a fake Franz Hals, okay? After doing research just now, trying to find a picture of it, I guess it's real. But I know for a fact they forged a Franz Hals, because you'll see, stuff happens because of it, okay? I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what the book is talking about. I don't know what Google's talking about. So don't you dare take any of this as fact. This is the fun, I guess, made-up part of this story. I don't know. I promise I have most of these facts right, but I guess not this one. Anyway, carry on. Don't quote me on that. I don't know. Google's not my friend, okay? This goes through 1924. This was like a long-standing issue. They were trying to get this fake Franz Hals attributed by someone. They like dunked it in water, I guess. I don't really know. That they were fucking about with these possibly centuries-old painting. The gelatin glue medium, which is resistant to alcohol, is not resistant to water. So it got like goofed up or something. I don't think they dunked the whole thing in water, otherwise this painting wouldn't exist. Teo, being the little freaking brainiac that he is, was like, no, oh my god, don't even freaking worry about it. This happens to all the old paintings. Pulls out a different fake and is like, look, no, all old paintings do this. Kind of smart, actually. That was kind of a boss bitch move. Good work, Teo. The attributor was De Groot, the guy who caught Nardis. So De Groot becomes a fake attributor, like, on accident. Also, because he kind of has this trend of, like, not being very good at being wrong. That comes up a little bit later. He's does not happy when he's incorrect. So he kind of digs his heels in and is like, okay, I believe you. So now the boys, they're getting confident. And Han is fucking pumping out these paintings like nutso. He's like, I'm gonna paint this thing called The Girl with the Blue Bow. This one, maybe, if I can find it. And they brought it to a guy named Dr. Wilhelm von Bode. I don't know if he's German or not. He was the Director General of the Prussian State Museum. And he was like, you're out of your fucking mind. This is fake. Which, good for him, because he was right. Although, here's a little fun fact. Some fakes later were made to cater to his tastes. And I believe he actually attributed them and was like, this is good. So, bias is a bitch. We all know this. 1926, De Groot buys The Laughing Cavalier. This year kind of starts what the book calls Han's liberal party period, where he's just hanging out with rich people. And it's much more likely than not that he fully adopted their opinions, their ideologies, all that kind of stuff. He was quite the chameleon. 1927, we are introduced to a man named Theodore Ward. Not Theo Van Weingarten, Theodore Ward. I'll call this guy Ward. Teo's Teo, because that's my boy, I think. He was an industrial paint chemist, and he collected, bought, sold, traded old masters' artwork. He was a bit of a connoisseur, very influential in this field, even though he wasn't technically an attributor. He and a man named Harold R. Wright are both aware of Han's forgeries. And those three are like, what if we get together and we get a little bit silly and we sell a painting called The Lace Maker to this guy named Frederick Schmidt Degner, who is an attributor to the Kaiser Frederick Museum. They bring it to Homeboy and he's like, this is a genuine, perfect, and very characteristic work of Jan Vermeer of Delft. That's embarrassing. The reason this works so well, this painting matches the description of a missing Vermeer from an 1816 auction. And this painting was so convincing that it hung in the National Gallery of Art along with this fuck-ass work. I hate this painting. Why did they think Vermeer would do this? My boy would never. My boy would never. Anyway, these two paintings hung in the National Gallery of Art until the 1950s. Nuts. This painting sold for, at the time, £37,000. I don't know the conversions on that. I tried to do the math. It was just embarrassing, okay? But this payment makes Han van Meegeren technically the most famous painter in the world, beating out Picasso, and he can't say a word about it. At this point, our Icarus is doing great. He's getting a little bit confident, and he's getting a little bit arrogant. And what does arrogance get you? At first, a wife, apparently. A second one. Han and Johanna marry after 5 years of cheating on their respective spouses. This same year, feeling quite silly, I would argue, Han starts this reactionary art magazine called De Kämpfen, which translates to The Fighting Cock, as in the bird. You sinner. Where, and I quote, he passed as a strutting rooster, pecking away at everything that annoyed him and looking for a fight. He was clearly very good at picking up on what people liked and what people could relate to. And since during this time he was already in good standing with the rich people, he then moved down to the middle class. Why? I don't really know. I think honestly he just wanted people to like him. He would emulate this middle class ideal of looking down on the pretentiousness of art in the same way that people don't like modern art. A lot of it is just really rich people doing stupid shit and then calling it art. I have opinions on this. We're not going to get into it. Also, in this magazine, there was an underlying message discussing what is real and what is fake, and it kind of excused a lot of what Han was doing. His editor was a man by the name of Jan Eubank. Hell if I know, but let's just put it out there. Would. Moving on. He was the headmaster of an elite grammar school in The Hague, and he dabbled in fashionism, so maybe wouldn't, but aesthetic purposes. He was a Catholic, and working with Han, it very clearly influenced him. The forgery started to become more religious, more Catholic based. It is important to note, Vermeer did have 2 religiously related paintings. I'll put them up there once again if I can. But then he just moved on to Dutch life. So, again, we're looking at this missing gap in Vermeer's career, something that he was known to do, but there's not a bunch of works relating to this, therefore ideal in the art market. This magazine ran for 3 entire years of just Han saying whatever the fuck he wanted, including getting so mad about Impressionism and modern art that he got racist about it. It was bad, okay? And also, quick little side note, he had the exact same opinions as Hitler. We're just gonna leave that one there. 1929, during the run of this magazine, Han wrote a silly little story about all of the old masters going into a museum in which one of the Vermeers that he did was displayed, and he hypes himself up through the voice of Vermeer. He's like, I did that, and it looks good, and I'm Vermeer. Also, does fake art even matter? It was looking back, glaringly obvious. But at the time, this was a silly little joke just to Han himself. And also, his homeboys that knew what was going on. 1930. Eubank writes a play called The False Madonna, in which a fake religious masterpiece is sold to the Louvre with a certificate obtained by Wilhelm von Bode. The underlying message of this, definitely also supported by Han, was that the age and authorship of a work were petty concerns compared to beauty, creative struggle, and religious belief. This same year, Han creates what is called the Greta Garbo Vermeer. I don't know what he was originally called, but during the trial, he basically was like, dude, you think this is a real Vermeer? That's Greta Garbo's face. And if you don't know who Greta Garbo is, it's this lady, black and white film actress. So he's getting quite kind of careless with what he's doing, but also in a very subtle and sneaky way where he can get away with all of this because there's nothing to really pinpoint him down, and people would be like, well, you're making fakes. He's like, no, but I'm gonna see how far I can get with it. 1932, magazine is done, and Han's dad dies. Because of this, likely, and also because he was a big ol' fucking drinker, he had been getting increasingly unlikable and more outwardly opinionated as opposed to keeping it contained within his magazine, within his friend group. He was a part of this group called, ready for this, the Hages Kunstkring. The Hages Kunstkring. It was a social group. They would get together, host art events, have a good time. Han was a part of this. There was an open seat this year, and some people were like, well, we could get Han. He's a homie. And because of his string of being a fucking problem, people were like, I fucking hate that guy. If he gets a seat on the board of the committee, I will leave. Han hears about this, resigns his membership. He's outie. Because Han is rich as shit from the lace maker. So he dips with Johanna. They go to the French Riviera. He's barely making art under his name. He's just kind of coasting on the fucking cash money that he got from this one painting. Also introducing a new forging medium, bakelite, which, hey, you probably don't know what that is. Are you ready for this? It's the shit that they coat telephones in, old telephones, costume jewelry that kind of plasticky shit. They were mixing pigment and painting with that. They would grind 17th century pigments into this liquid medium of bakelite and then paint with it on 17th century canvases, because I thought this was very interesting. If you look at the back of a canvas and it's perfectly white, well, you're not going to believe that it's actually an old painting. So they would use old 17th century paintings. How they got these paintings and what are the moral implications of stripping a painting and creating a forgery over it is not something that I'm fully gonna get into, but oh my god, that's probably an issue. And also, where did you get these canvases? Whatever. What I'm impressed with is the technical skill, because this was an extremely tedious process, because in order for it to set, you had to like bake it. Shout out to a movie I will talk about later, A Real Vermeer, which makes the mental image of this process so fucking funny. The first successful work is Gentleman at the Lady at the Spinet, I don't know. A guy named Abraham Bredius, another art attributor and a museum curator, authenticates it, but pretty much everyone else is like, this is fake, because it was really flat and gray, and I mean, you're painting with plastic, so like it's not gonna have that flowing look of oil paint. Still wildly impressive. Like, I'm never gonna get over that. And they use this for years too. Like, I'm pretty sure they used this up until the end of his forging career. During this time, as the 20s come to an end, the whole like Vermeer mania is slowing down, but Hans continues doing bakelite experimentation in the style of his homeboys Dehach, Hals, Vermeer. A couple years later, in 1935, Hahn was commissioned to do a memorial portrait for the mother of a man named Gerard A. Boon, who was a Dutch political figure, a feminist king. He thought women should be able to vote, and also with a middle name like Adolf, would you believe it, was anti-Hitler, actually. He was not rocking with fascism, okay? So in 1936, when Hahn, a friend now, approached him saying, hey, there's this family who is trying to escape fascism in Italy, I believe. I think it was an Italian family. Would you be willing to play middleman and sell this painting for them so they can get out? And Boon is like, absolutely, I hate fascism, let me help you out. This, like, personal and political betrayal is, I would argue, when Hans' arrogance and selfishness really came to a peak, and we all know what that means next. (1937) is when most discussion of Hahn comes up, because this is the year that the painting The Supper at Emmaus is created. There's a lot to say about this painting because it's the most significant one of his career. Because at this time, Germany the previous year had done the whole Berlin Olympics thing, and they were very passionate about who they were, and they thought that everyone else should be the exact same, which I'm sure will cause no problems in the future. The Supper at Emmaus was a type of picture. You could find modern equivalents to it in composition and general themes in Nazi art exhibitions. Actually, during the war, Hahn painted, under his own name, a lot of paintings that resembled this kind of structure, which mirrored this really iconic Nazi photograph of like a soldier leaving for war. I'm not gonna show it because I'm not gonna put that on my fucking YouTube channel, but just know the composition really mirrors a lot of the themes that were going on at the time. Abraham Bredius, the guy who attributed the really fake looking Vermeer, also attributed this one. In fact, like a dumbass, called it the Vermeer masterpiece, despite owning a real Vermeer of his own, which is the Allegory of Faith. It is no surprise that, to quote, the name Bredius became a byword for nitwittery in art historical circles, and his reputation has never really recovered. So, the two Bs, bed and breakfast, Bredius and Boon, attempted to sell to these fellows who own an art gallery, the Duveen brothers and Schmidt-Degner, who I mentioned before. In letters between the Duveen brothers and Degner, they called it a rotten fake. However, Schmidt-Degner changed his mind when he saw it in person and actually offered to trade it for a genuine Vermeer, which is The Mistress and the Maid. I don't remember if he actually bought it or not, or if he actually did that, but somehow, someway, the painting ends up in the Boijmans Museum, which is owned by some guy named Dirk Hanema. So I don't know who actually, owns this painting at the time. Either way, this painting is put on exhibition in 1938 from June through October. And it's centrally placed. 1939, things are an issue in Germany, and Holland is neutral in the war currently, so Hahn and Johanna go back there. Around then, Hahn was either a Nazi or not, depending on who he was talking to. In fact, it was known for him to, one, have Nazis at his parties, and be agreeing with them, and then basically turn around and be like, no, I fucking hate those guys. They just broke in. So it's his morals were never, ever, ever concrete. As long as he was running his fucking mouth, he was all things to all people. It should be noted, he participated in Nazi exhibits, made paintings under his own name for Nazi exhibitions. He never officially joined the party because that would be treason, and he never technically sold his paintings to them because that would be war profiteering. He could, at this point, have dropped everything in the forging area and made hella money from being a wartime collaborator and had his own solo art career. Obviously, he chose not to do that, otherwise this video would be kind of boring. Around this time, he also made a book with a certain poet. Pin in that. A lot of people who did sell to Nazis at the time would argue that it wasn't war profiteering, they were trying to scam the Nazis out of money by like upcharging them. And this was something that people would brag about like post-war, but it's very morally vague. Hahn definitely fell into this category. In May 1940, Netherlands is introduced to probably the second worst guy to ever exist, some guy named Herman Göring. And if I pronounce that wrong, don't give a shit. He bombs the city of Rotterdam, in which the supper at Emmaus was, and it was unharmed. And I find this really fascinating. I always think it's interesting when a museum is destroyed in one way or another and seeing what paintings survive. For example, the Last Supper, I'm pretty sure that like whole building was like knocked down, like all 3 walls except for the Last Supper. And that definitely causes spiritual outlook on these paintings, kind of no matter what. It's like, oh, this was saved. Why was it saved? Why was it safe? In this situation, the museum itself was unharmed, so good, but it definitely changes the view of the value on not only Emmaus, but all the paintings on display in this museum. Also, unsure if this was before or after the invasion, but in case there is any doubt that Hahn really liked Germany at this time, he had a mustache in his ID picture. And it was that big, okay? Not a good guy. Boone, before the war, ran away. Me too. So we got a new frontman named Renstribis. We're gonna call him Renz. How about that? Because I have no idea how you pronounce that last name. In total, 4 fakes sold, 3 biblical Vermeers, and 1 Descension. In 1941, a painting called The Head of Christ, thought to be a preliminary study for the supper at Emmaus, is sold to the Hugend Gallery for 475,000 guilders, which is different than pounds. I don't know the conversion rate, but that's not as much as Emmaus was sold. But clearly you can see Hahn like riding the coattails of this painting by doing then the preliminary study, which just so happened to be found after the original painting. 1942 features the creation of a work called Isaac Blessing Jacob, and it is genuinely shocking. I hope to God I can find a picture. Genuinely shocking that anyone believed this was a Vermeer. Because here, like this painting, Vermeer. What are we doing here, team? Why? Is it the war going on? Is that why? That's probably why. This painting really marks a point at which his own style had become synonymous with Vermeer, so he could kind of be lazy about it. And they got lucky with this one. I really think it was like confirmation bias, because he did use ultramarine blue, which was the pigment that Vermeer used, but if you look at it, like that's not Vermeer, bro. He sells it to the Hugend Gallery for 1.2 million guilders, which is a lot of fucking money, especially during the war. But after this, in 1943, he stops working with Stribs and the Hugend Gallery because they get suspicious of him. So, new frontman, his name is Jan Kok. K. K-O-K is how you spell it. Stop that. Who was Hahn's high school friend and really just seems to be experiencing a bout of bad luck in which he like meets up with his buddy. Oh my god, hey homie. And then his homie screws him over. Unknown if should I call him Cock? Unknown if Jan Kok knew he was selling a fake or not. But like, okay, weird detail, spoiler, they sell it. The money that Jan Kok earned from it was then put in Johanna, Hahn's wife's bank account, and like Jan Kok could access it whenever he wanted, but apparently he only took a little bit out and then like dipped the fuck out. This painting is called The Foot Washing. It was offered to De Boer, the cuck, who worked a bit too freely with German customers. He didn't really care if he was like selling culturally valuable paintings to the Nazis, which is not great. So Göring, who is Hitler's second in command, Göring's henchman, Meidel, sees the painting and is like, that's pretty fire. I think my boss, who's Hitler, would like this. The Hitler Museum, which didn't know that existed, crazy, said no, not interested. And then Meidel was told by De Boer, he was like, Well, another Vermeer might just show up on the market, don't you worry. This painting was bought by a museum in the Netherlands, mostly just because they wanted to keep it out of Nazis' hands. Like, they didn't really like it. It's also very contested if people actually believe this was a Vermeer or not, but they were like, just in case, we'll buy it for 1.3 million guilders. In March of 1943, people are starting to be like, I don't really trust this Han fella. Where is he getting literally all of his money? Because his paintings that he's making under his own name are not selling well. So the authorities, I don't know if it was the bank or like the government or whatever, are like, hey, we're gonna give us your money for a little bit because you're being a freak weirdo about it. Until you tell us where you're actually getting it, you don't get it back. And Han, in the most subtle way possible, decides to get rid of like all of his cash by buying an obscene amount of property. 57 individual properties by the end of the occupation. Interestingly, a lot of these properties were on streets that were named after famous artists. I thought that was cool. What's not cool, though, and what was pointed out in the documentary, is like, where are all these open houses coming from? He also apparently never actually managed these buildings. He got some big buff dude to handle all of the management, if you will, for him. So he was owner in name, never really in practice. For himself, he bought a place on the street Kirchgott 321, from a man with a long-ass name. We're gonna call him Renestra, who was a banker and worked very closely with Meidel. This place was a giant mansion, and it basically just kind of became Johanna's. She was like kind of chilling out, like not really rocking with the go lifestyle that Han was really on. Bars. Where Han spent a lot of his time instead was at Kirchgott 738, just down the street, to use as an art studio and private sexual playpen. Parties of hard liquor and easy women, in which, according to a sex worker, they could be quite fatiguing, but they paid well. In which that means like they could just grab jewels out of bowls, just like around the house. Like he would walk around with jewels, not jewels, but like jewels in bowls, and just like, it's like, thanks for a good night, wink wonk, here's a sexy necklace. During this year as well, another fake is dropped, Christ and the Adulteress. And this work is offered using Renestra as the middleman to Meidel. And Renestra fucks up. He tells Meidel that he got this painting from Han, which, like, you're not supposed to do. If you're middleman, you're supposed to, like, make up a story and leave Han out of it. They're not supposed to know you're a middleman for the person who made the painting. This motherfucker got lucky because there was no chemist around to test this painting. Han had run out of ultramarine blue because the war. People don't really care about ultramarine blue. They care about food rations, probably. But the painting nonetheless was declared genuine because there was no chemist to check that box. Later, during trial, Renestra and Han claimed that they never intended to sell it to Goring. They wanted a Dutch buyer, but apparently, like, Goring forced hands all around because he loved this painting. And why did he love this painting? Jesus is white, and the accusers are black, and this guy fucking sucks, and we've been through this. There's some horrific themes that are underlying this painting, but there was one problem. Well, that's a problem, but, like, there was one problem for Han. Goring, because he knew that Han originally had it, was like, well, where did you get this painting? And Han was like, I don't know, stop it. And Goring's like, no, motherfucker, where did you get this fucking painting? To the point where in February 1924, Han opens his door to a man holding a typewriter and a sheet of paper saying, you are going to write a letter to Goring explaining how you got this painting. Han, after probably the most sweaty hour of his life, said that he would reveal the owner's name within 2 years of Goring actually buying the painting. And this worked. It kind of settled Goring. He just kind of like wanted to put the blame on someone else in case the background of this was shady for whatever reason. Han is chilling the hell out. Like I said, he was too rich to care about the war. Everyone else is suffering, and he's, fucking bitches getting money kind of type deal. But it's not all sunshines and rainbows. Sunshines, plural? It's not all sunshine and rainbows, because people are like, hey, this guy is kind of sus. Because of this, in a very interesting play, he divorces Johanna, but only in name, gives her a decent chunk of his money, so if things go wrong, they'll have at least 800,000 guilders to their name. This also kept Johanna safe when it came to the trial, not that he knew that was going to happen yet, but it allowed her to feign ignorance of anything that was going on. 1945 is when things really kick off. May 9th, Germany surrenders. Ooh, pretty good. For like the next 20 days or so, the Netherlands goes a little bit crazy, which is warranted. But as far as like the public arrests and stuff, some pretty horrific shit happened. Not gonna get into the ethics of that whatsoever. Being arrested, specifically publicly, was never a good time, arguably. And on May 29th, 1945, the paper trail of Göring, Meidel, Renestra, that kind of stuff, all leads back to Hahn, and he is publicly arrested by a man named Joseph Pillar. Now, this is when, look, we're almost done. We're not almost done. I have like 4 pages of notes left. We're a decent chunk of the way through, and we have met, I would argue, the second most interesting character of this entire story. Joseph Pillar was a Jewish man. We're going to keep this in mind. Joseph Pillar was Jewish, and he was a Dutch resistance leader who kind of douchebagged his way to the top. His morals seemed to be on the right side, and he always seems to think he was doing the right thing, but he was very much kind of thought he was Superman in some ways. Was not asked to arrest Hahn. He kind of just stepped in this case by himself, which I think is kind of crazy. Things were a bit chaotic, so it wasn't really like that big of a deal, but overall he was very self-serving under the guise of doing the right thing. And so it's kind of argued that a lot of Hahn and Pillar's relationship was Pillar projecting a lot of his own thoughts about himself onto Hahn, and Hahn, being the socially manipulative person that he was, very much leached onto this. In June, Hahn is taken to an interrogation facility, and he admits to nothing at first, and then eventually admits to forging. And this is because he was initially accused of being a Nazi collaborator, which is like death penalty level bad, and this kind of moves him to be like, the paintings were fake, actually. And then he proceeded to cover himself up by saying, yeah, I was just trying to screw over Göring by selling him a fake painting that I made. You know, like, it wasn't for the money. I never did it for the money. Also, basically in the same breath, he blames selling the painting on Renestra. This really shows, like, kind of how good his manipulation was, because in the same track of argument, he was like, no, we wanted a Dutch buyer, but also we were trying to screw over Göring by selling him a fake. So it's like whatever benefited him the most was the thought process that he went with, and people just like believed him and never really caught on to that. Hahn claims he never even heard of Meidel, which is just a blatant lie, because it's kind of like, how do you not? And also, people literally like saw Hahn and Meidel like walking into the house together. This is when they arrest Renestra, and they lock him up like right next to Hahn, which I think is so fucking funny. Like, okay, you two sit next to each other and think about what you've done. Hahn never confessed to all of his forgeries. It was only the ones during the end of his career during the war. One, because he was mostly working by himself, therefore less people for him to screw over, less people to screw him over. And he didn't want to look like a long-standing criminal, but more like a nuisance for the Nazis, which really appeals to the public at the time. The whole discourse at the time was like, if you did anything to screw over the Nazis during this time, you're our homeboy. So he was like, I want to be a homeboy. Pillar then interviews Renestra, finds out that their statements are completely contradictory. So like any sane person, he puts them in a room together and just is like, duke it out. What kind of interrogation strategy is that? Like, all right, you two, I don't believe either of you, sit down and talk. Like, that's so fucking funny, actually. And apparently this transcript, which I couldn't get my hands on, but the author of the book could, shows how good Hahn was at playing into Pillar's sympathies, and therefore how biased Pillar was. Hahn tends to accuse Renestra of things that are like completely off track from what they're talking about, and Pillar like takes the bait every time. So he's very biased, really hard on Renestra, and really, really easy on Hahn. Okay. So remember that book that I mentioned like a while back, which was made with a certain poet? So this book was found in Hitler's library with an inscription that's like, love you, Hahn. So this fully makes Hahn like technically a traitor. I mean, war profiteering, trading with the enemy, giving a gift to Hitler. So all of this was posted in the newspaper. And keep in mind, everyone at the time is like, Team Hahn, we love Hahn, he screwed over Göring. And then it's posted in the newspaper that he gave Hitler a little art book. Oh, I forgot to mention as well, the poet that he worked with, Nazi. So like Nazi poet, Nazi art, in a Nazi book to the Nazi. The capital T, capital N. One day later, Hahn and Pillar work together to post the first and only admission of guilt that Han has ever created. Basically being like, oh, I forged everything, don't look over here at all the racist shit that I've done. Look at my forgeries, because I wanted to show them that I was just as good as Vermeer, but I couldn't tell them because they don't understand. Clearly paraphrasing here, but that was the general theme. And this works. This like totally fucking works. People believe them and they are back on Han's side within a day. To then prove in a court of law that Han did the forgeries, he's taken out of jail, put on house arrest to then create a fake Vermeer, which is Christ in the temple. This house arrest was the most casual shit ever. Johanna would come around and they hang out during the day, and then his mistress would come over and bring him booze and cigarettes. So honestly, if that's what house arrest is, lock me up, officer. But in 1946, the civilian police were like, okay, this is getting a bit out of hand. Okay, you're going to real jail, stop fucking about. And then he was released pending trial. Before the trial, Han became a little freaking celebrity. He was already well liked, obviously, but then the letter that him and Pillar published, and also the subsequent like interviews and like celebrity activities that Han would do, like the public loved this guy, to the point that a newspaper poll was like, who's the most popular guy in the Netherlands? Like, who does everyone know about? And the results were in this order. Number 1, the Prime Minister. Makes sense. Number 2, Han van Meegeren. And then number 3, the Prince. Han was above the Prince. The Prince. Han was above royalty in popularity. October 29th, 1947, the trial begins. And this was more theatrics than anything. Han states that he picked one of the best 5 artists to ever exist, among them being Da Vinci, Rembrandt, Frans Hals, and Michelangelo. That's 4. Oh, Vermeer. I forgot to add Vermeer. So he was like, I could have emulated any of them. I just picked 2 that I liked. Like I said, he claimed that the Beijing show, the gallery showing that was like kind of mid, like villain origin story. He's like, my feelings were so hurt. I had to prove to everyone that I was a good artist, but I did that by not telling anyone that I was making these paintings, whatever, stupid. During this trial, they went easy as fuck on him. His art forgery history barely touched on, Nazi sympathies completely ignored. He in total admitted to 6 of the biblical Vermeers and 2 Dehaches, and that could not scratch the surface less, like we're just skipping over Halls, that's fine, whatever. And he said, and I quote, I didn't do it for the money, which brought me nothing but trouble and unhappiness. Johanna said she never suspected him, she thought all the paintings belonged to an aristocratic family. Bullshit. He was sentenced to 1 year of imprisonment, and all of his personal assets were taken and given back to the people who lost money to his forgeries, within reason, obviously. And the judge apparently was like going easy on him because he was like, this guy's not really right in the head. At first, the public was like kind of wavering a little bit, but then turned around completely positive. The whole sentiment of like, he was causing chaos for the Nazis and he was being like a problem really just resonated with like what everyone wished that they could do. One must imagine Sisyphus to be happy, right? Bullshit. One must remember that until he knew he was falling, Icarus experienced nothing but ecstasy. And what if he never looked down? Because on December 31st, 1947, Han van Meegeren, without spending a second in jail, dies of a heart attack. This painting was one of the best things I've discovered out of this entire thing. Thank God I decided to do this stupid little parallel, because the world is shown toiling away. The workers continue. The plowman continues, while Icarus's legs are shown in the tiny little corner. So we carry on. Goring was sentenced to death by hanging pretty quickly, but he ended up poisoning himself because he's a fucking coward. Pillar basically got so annoying and was working on useless cases that the Dutch government basically shooed him away. And he actually ended up making a dressmaking business with his wife, and he retired in the 70s. The supper at Emmaus was hung between the modern and old masters in the gallery it now sits in, without any wall plaque. In total, 18 Han van Meegeren fakes are accounted for. I'm pretty sure this includes the other artists, or it's just 18 Vermeers. It's important to note that fakes have been and probably will forever be created. Obviously, it's a lot harder to make a fake now, or it's a lot harder or it's a lot harder to spot one because people are getting a lot better at it. But what's unique about Han's works is he not only emulated style, but he, and I quote, bent the past to his will. He filled in these gaps, like I've said. Also, in everything that I did in regards to my research, there was a very interesting through line of the morality and purpose and philosophy of fake art. Like the author of this book, Jonathan Lopez, mentions, fakes aren't meant to last. It doesn't matter. It only matters when they're getting bought. When the person who made them gets the check, they can break apart after the money is in the bank account. And they usually do. Like the Bakelite stuff. Like the 2 paintings that were hanging in the National Gallery of Art will like actively fall apart if you even pick them up because they're made of plastic. There was also this whole thing after Han got exposed for making fakes. There were people who actually did buy these fakes that had them hanging up in their house. Like, for example, there was this one woman who had bought a fake Vermeer during the Great Depression, thought nothing of it, and then found out it was a fake, and then hated it. And a lot of the buyers had the same reaction. And it's like, okay, well, why does that matter? In fact, in one of the movies that I watched, Han, who's depicted very ridiculously, makes a comment of not a single brushstroke has changed, but now it's useless, that the name isn't attached to it anymore. Why is that? I will say I'm giving no answers today. I'm just kind of bringing up these questions. Perhaps I will discuss it further because I would like to get more into philosophy in general on this channel. Whatever, that's just a side note. This whole story and Han's work does still have value, though. As much as I'm roasting the guy and do think he's a genuinely bad person along with most of the people in this story, his forgeries allowed a lot more scrutiny to be placed on Vermeer works. Han was not the only one faking Vermeers, so there were other fakes that were found. It allowed a better understanding of the genuine artist. Personally, I think it would be really cool if the fakes were displayed with proper credit and explanation as to why they're being displayed. Like if there was like a whole fake exhibit, I think it'd be really interesting to just see what people saw and were convinced of what was a genuine masterwork despite being painted by what maybe they would just see as some guy. Han, in general, was so good at playing the part of anyone except himself. He matched the people that he was with. He matched the art that he was trying to emulate. He decided what people wanted to see and put it onto canvas. And I truly believe that he felt he grew those wings himself. You thought I was done. No. I'm not gonna end it on that fucking cornball ass line, okay? I want to talk about the stuff that I did for research in this video because this was the most unique research process that I did because I'm not doing it for school. So fucking MLA citation, I can do whatever I want. I used the website Essential Vermeer for some stuff, but I will say the 2 articles I read had conflicting information with the book, which I'm kind of taking as like my Bible when it comes to all of this because it's holy shit so well researched. So I kind of treated it like Wikipedia, more just kind of reviewing information than anything. I watched a couple of movies. I just watched them because I was curious. Neither of them have any real like factual value. The first movie I watched was called The Last Vermeer, and honestly, this one was so fucking disappointing. It does provide a decent sense of like what life was like and how like stressful the war is and all that shit and like post-war situations, but like you can find that literally anywhere else. I wish it had gone more in depth on Pillar and his relationship with Han. It like gives Pillar like a fucking love triangle. Why? That's so dumb. It's like they took the least interesting aspects of both Pillar and Han and like watered them down, and it was just like so frustrating to watch because it's like you have this vibrant, crazy, morally complex story and you're choosing this bullshit. And also I'm pretty sure this one was like based on the book by Jonathan Lopez. No, bitch, it's not. Don't disrespect my boy like that. If you choose to watch it for whatever fucking reason, I would recommend reading the last 2 chapters of the book at the very least because it like provides some context. I also watched this movie called A Real Vermeer. Stupid ass movie. Like not even remotely factual, but I had a great fucking time watching it. I would recommend watching this movie, just don't take any of it as fact. And then as far as like the actual like educational realm of it, I watched 2 documentaries. One is actually on YouTube, so I'll put the link to that in the description. One was called Close to Vermeer, which really helped like solidify my opinions and that kind of stuff, and talks about Vermeer the artist. And then Van Meegeren, the forger who fooled the Nazis, which is the one on YouTube. Very good. I really like their perspectives on that. It was educational and covered things well. If you don't want to read a whole fucking book, I would suggest go watching those. But if you want to, check out the book. It was very, very well written. I'm using that one for nonfiction stories, and especially like I don't really care about war like hearing about it. Like that's not really the point of history that interests me. But the book was very interesting and really easy to read, and I can tell that Jonathan Lopez and I share similar opinions and things, because he's like kind of goofing around every once in a while, like, you know, in an academic sense. But yeah, it's very good. All right. Damn, I think I'm done. Thanks for watching. Sorry I was gone. Like I said, everything got really bad all at once. No idea what my upload schedule is going to be. I'm also a student, so like, you know, give me some, not that you guys are bothering me, but like, give me some grace, you know what I mean? I don't know, I'll upload when I can. I think I might, take a little bit of a break from art history stuff because there's some other ideas I have for videos. I'm also working on some silly little projects. I rented a camcorder for my library and I got excited. Hope you have a good time. Happy holidays if you celebrate. Yeah, get the fuck out of here. I'll see you later.